Welcome to Unsolved Mysteries, JonBenet's Web Truths. This evening we will be featuring the 2016 Reelz original documentary, OverKill, The Unsolved Murder of JonBenet. And without any delay, let's get right into this.
Kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on. There's a note left. Our daughter's gone.
6 hours after Patsy Ramsey's frantic 911 call, JonBenet Ramsey's body was found in the basement of her own home. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey. JonBenet was found dead in Boulder. JonBenet Ramsey.
There's always a story behind the headlines. But in time, we would see that this isn't what we think it is.
That line between entertainment and journalism was almost non-existent. Every single tabloid, the front page is pictures of her. But nobody's got the same story.
You know, the gardener did it. You know, Santa Claus did it. The housekeeper did it.
Police and investigators have assured us that this is a case that can be solved.
The beauty pageant videos were very damaging.
But let me assure you that I did not kill JonBenet.
I want to say something to the person or persons that committed this crime. The list of suspects narrows. Soon there will be no one on the list but you.
In some ways, it's like the Lindbergh kidnapping. It has that sort of power.
The victimology here is what tugs at the heartstrings of people generally and causes people still to kind of focus on the case.
You may be eluding the authorities for a time, but God knows who you are, and we will find you.
It has been 2 decades since 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey was found murdered in the basement of her family's mansion on 15th Street in Boulder, Colorado. And the brutal killing remains unsolved. The little girl was bludgeoned and strangled to death. It is something Boulder officials were not prepared to handle. When photos and videos of young JonBenet, dressed as an alluring adult for child beauty pageants, are sold to the tabloids, the world wants in on the story. The New Yorker magazine sends journalist Lauren Schiller to find out what's going on behind the headlines.
Does it bother me that the answers are not clear? Yes, because if my daughter had been killed, I wouldn't want to hang around for 20 years to find out the answers. I'd be on top of it every goddamn day.
In the next 2 hours, you will look into Schiller's extensive archives and recordings, a journalistic masterwork in which he interviewed eyewitnesses, law enforcement officers, investigators, scientific and forensic experts, criminologists, more than 100 people directly involved with the case. This exhaustive examination of the facts led Schiller to write the New York Times best-selling book, Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, which is considered to be the definitive narrative of the story. In these recordings are facts that had little meaning at the time. But now, answers are found to troubling questions, explanations behind the death of JonBenet that have been hidden in Schiller's secret archive for decades, including police interrogation and legal deposition videotapes.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give you the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so be it?
Yes, I do.
Because of Schiller's tremendous authenticity in his approach to telling the story of JonBenet Ramsey in his book, Schiller would be asked to direct the hit television movie Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. To this day, many questions about the case remain unanswered or shrouded in so much confusion that some facts are completely open to interpretation. This program shines light on those questions and lets viewers draw their own conclusions as to the answers.
I drove from Denver, Colorado into Boulder And something just surprised me. Boulder was like an island in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by all of this area that had not been urbanized yet, that in essence there were no new home developments. And behind it, looming up, were the Flatirons. You know, this was where the Continental Divide was. And it really looked like an oasis.
People in Boulder like Boulder because it's out of sight of Denver. It's got this beautiful mountain stream running through town. And they're just kind of in their own enclave, and they like it that way.
In 1996, Boulder was then known, and probably still is known, as the Berkeley in the Rockies. Very kind of a laid-back, liberal academic orientation because of the location of the University of Colorado there.
This community loves its privacy, loves its intellect. The people here pretty much stay out of government and want government to be quiet.
I don't want to say the police department there was a provincial police department, but they certainly were not as experienced as the city of Denver's police department was.
911 emergency. Police. What's going on? 515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left and our daughter's gone. A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter? 6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old. How long ago was it? I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's
Does it say who took her?
What?
Does it say who took her?
I don't know. There's a ransom note here.
It's a ransom note?
It says FBTC. Victory. Please.
Okay, what's your name?
Are you Kathy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please.
I'm sending an officer over, okay?
Please.
Do you know how long she's been gone?
No, I don't. Please, we just got out. Is you in here? Oh my God, please.
Okay,
Please, there's somebody.
I am, honey.
Please.
Take a deep breath,
Please,
okay?
hurry.
Patsy.
This was at Christmas time. Everybody was away on vacation. They were understaffed. And they couldn't bring in staff fast enough. So there was only one detective at the crime scene, Linda Arndt. There was only one police officer guarding the front door. Nobody guarding the back door.
Let's be honest, the B team was on the day of this offense. I mean, it is what it is.
Got a call from Pete Hostrom, and he just said that they had what appeared to be a kidnapping. The first thing that he told them was, don't take any marked cars up there. And they said, oops, too late. We've already got about 4 of them parked out front.
Patsy Ramsey started calling some of her friends to come to the house. As dramatized in Schiller's movie, Perfect Murder, Perfect Town.
I can't remember. It was just, come over, something's happened. Yeah. So that was sort of just, didn't know what, it was a different deal.
When I got there, she just kept saying, they've killed my baby. And she reached up and touched my face and she said, couldn't you fix this for me?
The ransom note tells you between 8 and 10 o'clock, we're going to call. The police already have what is known as a phone trap. That means they can pick up the incoming number or the outgoing number. They can't listen to the conversation because they don't have a court order yet. Sometime in the late morning, when there was no phone call between 8 and 10, the police, in consultation with the FBI, decide the house has got to be searched again from top to bottom. Linda Arndt lost sight of John Ramsey for almost an hour and a half. And of course, the FBI and the police were very upset because you got to keep eyes on every one of those people.
Is everyone?
I don't see Mr. Ramsey. Let me check in the front.
Because the case is a kidnapping, FBI Special Agent Ron Walker is called in.
It was cold that day. It was really cold on the 26th of December in 1996. And I'd just gotten out of the shower when my pager went off. It was a 911 called the office. I was told at that point about a kidnapping for ransom. And the victim was a child. That's the only information I had at that point.
At the Boulder Police Department, Walker reviews a copy of the ransom note and a photograph of JonBenet.
I had been told by then, when I got in there, that she was 5 or 6 years old. And then someone told me, well, she's in these beauty pageants and that's a glamour shot. So the first thing I started thinking about in terms of her kidnapping was, is this something that was precipitated by her appearance in beauty pageants?
At 1 p.m., Boulder Police Detective Linda Arndt asks John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White to search the house again to see if anything is amiss.
He immediately grabs his buddy Fleet White and says, we're going to the basement, and drags him down to the basement right away.
He goes immediately to the wine cellar. Why? We may never know. He slightly stepped into the door and saw a blanket laying on the floor. And he sees his daughter's body laying there with a piece of tape across her mouth, her hands above her head. And of course, he rushes to that body. Why was that body not found earlier in the morning?
John brought the body of his daughter upstairs and put it in the foyer. And then Detective Arndt picked the body up and moved it into the main living room area where the Christmas tree was located. I'm thinking more and more contamination of crime scenes. More people handling bodies that don't need to be handling them. When I walked in the door, I asked Officer French where had the body been placed. And he said, well, right there. And I was standing on the very rug onto which John Ramsey had placed the body of his daughter.
And everybody started walking down that hallway, contaminating whatever trace evidence may have been on that floor from the original body.
There was never a complete gathering of all the evidence. Nobody knows what isn't known about the case because the information was trampled on.
The gross contamination of the crime scene by the number of people that were in there, it just made it impossible to identify a particular person who may have touched or handled something. You know, this is going to be a nightmare.
So John Ramsey finds his daughter's body.
I took the tape off of her mouth. I tried to untie the cord that was wrapped around her arms, and I kissed her and talked to her. I realized that she wasn't just asleep, that this was not good, and I carried her upstairs.
Her body is like a plank of wood. Rigor mortis had set in. She wasn't killed an hour before, 2 hours before. She was killed 10, 12 hours before.
When I walked into the house and took a good scan, I saw the little girl's body there right in front of the Christmas tree, and that was a real heart-wrenching kind of moment for me, knowing that it was Christmas and here we have a dead child.
When I first heard that it had turned into a homicide, the first thing I thought was the most difficult thing that we deal with as police officers is the death of a child. Infant, toddler, teenager, whatever it is, those are very, very difficult for us.
Boulder Detective Linda Arndt uses another blanket to cover the dead girl's body, which has been moved from the foyer to beneath the family's Christmas tree. The crime scene is a mess.
You had all these folks, the Fernies and the Whites and the pastor, and so many people there depositing so much. It just made it impossible to identify a particular person who may have touched or handled something. So the way that the crime scene was mismanaged really dictates that the case can't be and won't be solved.
As the Ramsey home continues to fill with police and family, Patsy is at first hysterical and screams to their family reverend that God should raise JonBenet from the dead, the way God raised Lazarus. But then she and John Ramsey go quiet.
Patsy was off in the solarium and she was surrounded by a number of her friends that were consoling her. John Ramsey, on the other hand, was quite some distance away in the kitchen area, and he just looked to me rather detached. Typically, when you have a child murdered or a child missing, you find that the parents are wanting to be close to each other, they're holding on to each other, they're consoling each other, they're supporting each other emotionally. And there was none of that going on in this house on that particular morning.
JonBenet has a garrote tied so tightly around her neck that it not only strangled her, but dug deeply into her skin.
It wasn't like she was smothered to death with a pillow or somebody, took their hands to strangle her, but she had been garroted.
This garrote was constructed pretty sophisticated way. Somebody has to have took some time to do that.
This is a more complicated, more intricate way to strangle. The offender could use the wooden part of the garrote as leverage to pull and use that slip knot to strangle that victim.
It just produces excruciating pain. It is torture.
Whoever's in this situation is under some stress at this point. Anytime we're under stress, we revert to things that we're most comfortable and familiar with.
The garrote just didn't fit the whole scene, because why do you need a handle to a garrote when on the other side there is no handle, and when you're dealing with a little kid that all you need is one hand to strangle her if you want to?
Have you had occasion to be able to look at the knot that was tied around the so-called paintbrush garrote?
I have not.
Okay. Is there any reason why you haven't?
It's very painful for me.
The use of a ligature in a garrote to tighten it, a lot of people looked at that and said, per se, that could not be a family member. They found some shards from Patsy Ramsey's paint supplies down there on the basement floor in that vicinity. So whoever garroted the child broke that item down there and probably applied it in that basement room. Knowing the Ramsey family history and knowing the kind of people they were, it's hard to come to that conclusion that one of those people would have intentionally asphyxiated their daughter with a garrote, unless it is to create a picture of something that needed to be created to explain the story.
In addition to the strangling by garrote, JonBenet Ramsey has suffered a lethal blow to the head, even though the skin on her skull is not broken, and no blood is visible on her body or at the crime scene.
The other injury that she had was a very severe head injury, and this was associated not so much with injury on the outside of her scalp. I think the only evidence that we had that was there was a bruise or a contusion. But when the autopsy was carried out, it was actually possible to see a very large fracture of the skull.
She is so brutalized that at first authorities say there is no way a parent could inflict that kind of damage on their own child. Because of that, early speculation is that an intruder came into the home that night, attempted to kidnap the girl, and when that didn't work, killed her in a rage, left her body in the wine cellar room, fled up the stairs and out one of the doors.
In talking with the coroner, I pushed him very hard. Which took place first, the garroting and strangulation or the blow to the head? And he said, I've put them both together because I don't know.
She suffered a severe skull fracture, depressive skull fracture with subdural hematoma, brain bleeding, and brain swelling. When I saw the body, I did not see any evidence of cranial injury. And it doesn't necessarily have to happen that way. So, was that an accidental injury, or was that an injury that now needed to be covered up?
There's no doubt in my mind that a flashlight that was in the kitchen on the counter was used, and that head of the flashlight fits just absolutely perfectly into that rectangular fracture.
Also, the description John Ramsey gives of how JonBenet's body was carefully laid in the basement storage room and then covered with a blanket as if to comfort and protect her raises flags.
I can tell you unequivocally that if you show me a body that has been cared for after the victim was murdered, in 99% of the cases, if not 100% of the cases, the perpetrator is someone who is intimately familiar with the victim.
John Ramsey said, I can't remember how the blanket was. I don't know if the blanket was thrown on her. All I know is I was trying to undo the rope on her wrists, and I grabbed the duct tape off of her mouth and ran her upstairs in case she was still alive.
To compound the horrific manner in which JonBenet died, it's reported that she may have suffered some kind of sexual assault, though no one can agree on what type of assault or when it occurred.
And a local newspaper today reported that JonBenet had been sexually assaulted.
I am not confirming it or denying it.
There was also an abrasion in JonBenet's genital area.
When it comes to the issue of digital penetration, the bottom line is none of us really know. The evidence is really, at best, inconclusive.
We thought we had semen. When we learned we didn't have semen, it changed drastically.
One of the issues is that in her underwear, there were 2 spots of blood, one of which contained DNA that was able to exclude the parents, exclude the victim, exclude everybody up to this point. So we just don't know whose DNA it is. This might suggest that this is a stranger offender who is yet to be identified that was there at the scene.
And you've got these 2 competing and very compelling theories. And you have really good arguments being made for both.
What we have here are 2 paired injuries. You can see here on the cheek an area that's brown, and it's paired up with a much smaller area right here. If you look on the left side of her back, we also had 2 very similar types of injuries. These marks are about 3.5 centimeters from each other. Detective Smith was able to find a stun gun, and the electrodes are 3.5 centimeters apart.
You have those that are thoroughly convinced that you had an intruder that was in the house waiting for the family to come home, attempted to kidnap the daughter, fashioned a note.
Shame on me if I seize on one piece of information as that piece of information or data that's going to send someone to prison. That's not how this works. We don't just take the one voice, the one person who says, yep, absolutely, it's a stun gun. Where's the honesty and integrity in that?
From the moment she reports her daughter missing, the Boulder police find Patsy and John Ramsey uncooperative in the investigation. In Patsy's first formal police interview, 4 months after the death of JonBenet, she criticized the police for focusing only on her family as murder suspects.
I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it, and we didn't have a clue of anybody who did do it. Go back to the damn drawing board. It's very hard to be here, but it is a damn sight harder to be sitting at home in Atlanta, Georgia, wondering every second of every day what you guys are doing out here. And I can't stand the thought of thinking somebody's out here walking on the street. God knows we might do it again to some other child. You know, quit screwing around asking me about things that are ridiculous and let's find the person that did this.
In a 2001 legal deposition, Patsy Ramsey is asked about the intruder theory.
More about that theory that you remember or have developed?
Well, that's basically it. There was someone who was not a member of our family in our home that night, took JonBenet from her bed and murdered her.
But being uncooperative on the advice of their attorneys and being a murderer are two different things.
These are all good people. These are all good people. These were not violent or mean or inherently dishonest or antisocial individuals. These were good people living a good, clean life.
Patsy would holler out at the kids, come in, do your homework. She was very attentive, made sure they did their homework. And the kids were just normal kids. And the pageant world was just one little spoke in their life.
Still, despite the family's idyllic all-American appearances, the Boulder police continued to consider them the prime suspects. Whoever killed JonBenet had been inside the home that night, and in their opinion, the only people in the house were John and Patsy Ramsey and their 9-year-old son, Burke. And the police make it clear from the first day of the murder investigation that they want no help from any outside agency, even the FBI. FBI Special Agent Ron Walker is specifically told not to get involved by Boulder Police Commander John Eller.
Back at the police command post, after I arrived back there with Commander Eller, telling him that, we're happy to stay here, we're happy to work with you, we're happy to provide any and all assistance that we can to you. He didn't really respond too positively to that. He was more intent on saying, well, thanks, but I don't think we need you.
The Denver Police Department, Chief Mashad, said, my department is your department if you need anything. And Commander Eller wanted nobody to put a finger into that pie.
The B team was on the day of this offense. I mean, it is what it is. We're not talking about a Chicago or a Detroit or an LA. It reminded me of a sporting event where the starters were benched for the first quarter. The other team got ahead so far that when the starters came back in the game, all they were doing was playing catch up, and then having to defend what the scrubs had done.
Steve Thomas is one of the lead Boulder police detectives on the case.
I believe JonBenet awakened after wetting her bed, as indicated by the plastic sheets, the urine stains. I never believed that the child was sexually abused for the gratification of the offender, but the vaginal trauma was some sort of corporal punishment. One of the doctors we consulted cited toileting issues as a textbook example of causing a parental rage. So in my hypothesis, there was some sort of explosive encounter in the child's bathroom. I believe JonBenet was slammed against a hard surface, such as the edge of a tub, inflicting a mortal head wound. She was unconscious, but her heart was still beating. Patsy would not have known that JonBenet was still alive because the child already appeared to be dead. It was the critical moment in which she had to either call for help or find an alternative explanation for her daughter's death.
If Thomas is correct, then JonBenet was taken to the basement by either one or both of her parents, where her hands were tied, mouth taped, and then she was garroted. Only then was the ransom note written to cover up the tragedy of her death.
Steve Thomas said something to me that was so shocking it was unbelievable. If the DA would only let me put her in jail for any reason, I know a jail cell will break her and she'll confess to everything.
He's already made up his mind, and he says that.
Now, that's not the way good detective work works. You take the evidence, and the evidence leads you to the conclusion. You don't start with the conclusion.
My whole career, I have dealt with police officers, and I have just met some really smart ones who believe in follow the evidence, and they're honorable about it. And that's what this case needed.
When the media points a finger at someone and says, this is the perpetrator, unless that came from a press release of the investigating agency, they are absolutely doing a disservice to the police department. Because what that does is, especially if it's not the perpetrator, it instills distrust within that law enforcement agency. The community no longer trusts the police department.
They criticized the Boulder police for not doing what the police should have done on the 26th of December, and that was separate John and Patsy into 2 different interview locations and get them interviewed and get a full signed statement from them.
The investigators in District Attorney Alex Hunter's office are convinced an intruder broke into the house and committed the crime, pointing to evidence like this unknown shoe print found in the home's basement.
Add to that, you have two agencies, the Boulder District Attorney's Office and the Boulder Police Department. There's a lot of friction there. People that become very entrenched and very staunch about their respective opinion.
Everybody makes mistakes at crime scenes. And I don't want to lay the blame on any particular person, but it was the philosophy in the police department at that time on the command staff that inhibited the officers and the detectives from doing the job that they knew they needed to do.
You had the Boulder Police Department believing that an intruder did not commit this offense. You had some people in the Boulder DA's office believing that an intruder did commit this offense.
People are afraid to make a decision, whether it's prosecutors or whoever it is. They don't want to make a mistake because every single move that they make is being scrutinized.
It is August 6th, 1998. A warm Thursday morning in Boulder, Colorado. As the town comes to life and residents read the morning paper, they discover a blockbuster letter in print. Steve Thomas, one of the lead Boulder detectives on the JonBenet Ramsey murder case, is quitting. And he pulls no punches in letting people know why. The battle between the police and the district attorney's office, and whether to charge John and Patsy Ramsey with the murder of their daughter, is untenable. Thomas tells journalist Lauren Schiller why he wrote the letter.
What happened was detectives began, taking time off, and then we saw the DA's office, rather than what they were saying publicly was this needs careful review and our people need to get together, but they were taking vacations, and vacations turned into Alaska cruises, and I thought, all these enumerated frustrations, this is going nowhere. Maybe my letter will make a difference.
In his letter, Thomas writes, "The very entity with whom we shared our investigative case file to see justice sought, I felt was betraying this case. We were never afforded true prosecutorial support. There was never a consolidation of resources. All legal opportunities were not made available. How were we expected to solve this case when the district attorney's office was crippling us with their positions? I believe they were literally facilitating the escape of justice."
I'm bracing myself, anticipating the worst, but that letter was mild. My letter stands as the honest God's truth. I've said all I want to say, but you can rest assured that if they start a war, they're going to get hurt a lot worse than I am. What can they do to me? They came and took my badge and credentials, but they can't take what's between my ears.
After he left the department, Thomas went on to write a book, critical of how the case was handled. Thomas's resignation sends shockwaves through Boulder. District Attorney Alex Hunter, who had been fighting not to impanel a grand jury to hear evidence, backs off.
We needed to convene the grand jury to take advantage of some of the powers that the Colorado grand jury has that are not otherwise available to a prosecutor. I wanted to retain a grand jury specialist, and to make a long story short, that person ultimately was Mike Kane.
There was no respect. I think that the police department looked at the district attorney's office as a bunch of do-gooders. It was Boulder. Things are different in Boulder. If I heard that one time, I heard it 1,000 times. And they didn't respect the ability of the district attorney's staff to handle tough cases, when actually I agree that there wasn't enough evidence to bring charges. And that became one of the first things that I dealt with when I got involved in it.
Kane tells Hunter he will take the case under one condition.
We don't have press conferences. We don't leak information to the press. People may not like it. They may have an expectation. They may have a desire, but it's counterproductive to the investigation, having this constant updating of the public of where we are. And from that point on, particularly after the one detective who had a lot of contact with the media, after he was no longer involved in the case, it became a real vacuum.
With the leaks now buttoned up tight, the grand jury meets to hear evidence 5 weeks after Steve Thomas resigns. They hear from Lou Smith, the famed crime detective hired by the district attorney to thoroughly investigate whether an intruder was responsible for the murder. But Smith resigns from the case as well. He insists the Ramseys are innocent and, quote, a very dangerous killer is still out there.
I left mainly because, I just seen injustice here. Right. And a great deal of it. And you can either go along with it or you can just be quiet and not say anything about it. Sure. Or you can just get off the truck. Right. And let them drive the truck where it might go.
For the next year, the grand jury hears testimony, each day leaving the Boulder Justice Center without saying a word. They are faced with deciphering not only complex forensic evidence, but some of the most chilling facts of the story. One of which is the mystery of the pineapple found in JonBenet's stomach after she was killed. John and Patsy Ramsey said they put JonBenet to bed that evening and that she never ate pineapple. But when the girl's stomach contents were removed, the coroner discovered JonBenet ate pineapple a few hours before she was killed.
That says that JonBenet at some point got up in the middle of the night, or somebody brought her someplace in the house and she had sliced pineapple. So now the police, when they discover that from the autopsy, having already taken crime scene photos, they start looking for that pineapple. And they find a bowl on the dining room table that they first thought was cereal mixed with milk. They didn't know that JonBenet loved her fruit with milk.
The most significant piece of physical evidence in this case is the gastric contents of the victim indicate that there was a pineapple-like substance found. That to me is the one immovable piece of physical evidence that is irrefutable. And it's a significant piece of evidence because it locks in the timeline.
The presence of undigested stuff in her digestive tract is contrary to what the parents have told us. The parents even denied that she ever had any pineapple, or they denied feeding her pineapple.
We know that the child did not have pineapple at any point earlier that evening or during that day. That does not square with the fact that the child was asleep when the Ramseys got home. Or maybe the child was asleep and then got up at some point and had pineapple.
With respect to JonBenet, was pineapple a favorite meal of hers?
She liked fruit in general.
No particular fruit?
Just most any fruit.
If you believe the intruder theory, then that means that the intruder came in and had pineapple with the victim. Does that make any sense? I don't think so, especially when we know that there was Mrs. Ramsey's fingerprint and JonBenet's fingerprint on that bowl of the pineapple.
The jurors are also taken to the Ramsey home so they can see for themselves the layout of the massive house and the dark, dank basement room where JonBenet's body was found. Authorities have always found it strange that the house was searched twice that morning. Yet it wasn't until 1 in the afternoon that John Ramsey and his close friend Fleet White discovered JonBenet dead, stiff from rigor mortis.
Why was that body not found when Fleet White himself went into that room earlier in the morning? I went and I stood there where Fleet White stood on the threshold of that doorway. And the light in the hallway is about 6 feet behind him. So when you stand in that threshold, ambient light from the hallway does not penetrate into the wine cellar. And especially, as you know, when you instantaneously come from a lighted room into a dark area, eyes do not adjust that quickly.
When Fleet White and John Ramsey search the basement again, JonBenet's body is found.
1 o'clock in the afternoon, give or take a few minutes, John Ramsey goes to search. He doesn't stand at the threshold. He crosses the threshold. Why? Because he knows where the light switch is. And he knows he has to go in further for the light switch. And as he crosses the threshold, the ambient light now shines on the lightest object, and that is a blanket. He turns the light switch on and he sees the blanket, where Fleet White did not. Was the body there all morning? And if experts had maybe searched the house at the very beginning, maybe the results would have been different.
One year after the grand jury was convened to hear evidence in the JonBenet Ramsey case, they reached their conclusions, and they delivered a written decision of their findings to DA Alex Hunter, which is referred to as a true bill.
Boulder Grand Jury has completed its work and will not return. No charges have been filed. That I and my prosecution task force believe we do not have sufficient evidence to warrant the filing of charges against anyone who has been investigated at this time.
And Alex Hunter gets up there with very carefully worded speech and says, the evidence has been reviewed by my office, and there is not sufficient evidence to indict anybody in this case. Of course, he leaves out the fact that the true bills are only against the Ramseys.
Hunter believes there was not sufficient evidence to take the case to a jury because he could never prove that they were involved in the murder beyond a reasonable doubt. In 2013, the grand jury's written findings are made public. The findings against both parents said the Ramseys, quote, unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of JonBenet Ramsey, and that the Ramseys rendered assistance to a person, quote, knowing the person being assisted has committed and was suspected of the crime of murder in the first degree, and child abuse resulting in death. But in the end, the true bill fails to say the Ramseys are directly responsible for JonBenet's death. However, being legally conservative, Hunter believed that there was not sufficient evidence to file charges against the Ramseys.
You have a DA who refuses to file charges because he can't win the case. I mean, he knows that the first thing that's going to happen is that the wife and the husband would be separated at 2 trials. And then how are you going to say, oh, this one did this one did that? Patsy Ramsey's attorneys could say she didn't do it, somebody else did it.
Today, the case remains unsolved, and the 2 competing theories about JonBenet Ramsey's death live on. Lou Smith, the prosecution's investigator who believed an intruder killed the little girl, died several years ago. But he left behind a taped interview detailing what he believes really happened during the early morning hours, the day after Christmas, 1996. It all starts with a stun gun.
JonBenet, take a look at her. Very happy and smiling. No marks on the side of her face. Those marks were inflicted on JonBenet by a very brutal and twisted person. JonBenet was just brutally murdered by someone that used a stun gun on her. He took her out of her bed on Christmas night. He brought her down to the furthest part of that basement. He constructed a garrote on the back of her neck. He had this fantasy what he was going to do with JonBenet, and he brutally killed her. And he brutally garroted a little 6-year-old girl. That's the personality I see in that basement that night.
and it does not match the parents. At least look in that direction that we're looking at an intruder, and that's what I'm saying.
Boulder Police Detective Steve Thomas, an adamant proponent that someone in the family killed JonBenet, quit the police department over the case. He went on to write a book about what he thinks really happened. And here's what he told the district attorney's investigators.
In my hypothesis, an approaching 40th birthday, the busy holiday season, an exhausting Christmas day, and an argument with JonBenet had left Patsy frazzled. Her beautiful daughter, whom she frequently dressed almost as a twin, had rebelled against wearing the same outfit. When they came home, JonBenet, who had not eaten much at the White's party, was hungry. Her mother let her have some pineapple, and then the kids were put to bed.
Thomas says JonBenet awoke after wetting her bed, something that enraged Patsy.
Patsy would not be the first mother to lose control in such a situation.
Thomas said Patsy most likely slammed JonBenet's head against something hard, like the edge of the bathtub in her bathroom. This was done out of massive frustration, without the intention to kill.
She was unconscious, but her heart was still beating.
Thomas says this was the crucial moment, to call for help or do something to protect her family.
But I believe panic overtook her. Patsy moved the body of JonBenet down to the basement and hid her in the little room. Patsy needed a diversion and planned the way she thought a kidnapping should look. She returned upstairs to the kitchen and started a ransom note. By doing so, she created the government's best piece of evidence. As I envisioned it, Patsy returned to the basement, a woman caught up in panic, where she could have seen, perhaps by detecting a faint heartbeat or a sound or a slight movement, that although completely unconscious, JonBenet was not dead. Others might argue that Patsy did not know the child was still alive. In my hypothesis, she took the next step, looking for the closest available items in desperation. Only feet away was her paint tote. She grabbed a paintbrush and broke it to fashion the garrote with some cord. Then she looped the cord around the girl's neck. In my scenario, she choked JonBenet from behind with a grip on her broken paintbrush handle, pulling the ligature. JonBenet, still unconscious, would never have felt it. There are only 4 ways to die: suicide, natural, accidental, or homicide. This accident, in my opinion, had just become a murder. That's the way I see it.
Even if police found a family member's fingerprints on the flashlight that some believed killed JonBenet, or DNA on her clothes, it still would not prove a family member was the perpetrator. They lived in the house and were with their daughter every day. If the killer was an intruder, what continues to prevent the murder from being solved was the police's original inability to secure the crime scene and its subsequent continuation. If the killer did leave some evidence behind, it is yet to be discovered. So much has changed since 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey was found murdered in a storage room in the basement of her family's home the day after Christmas in 1996.
It's not just a story of a little girl who is killed in her own home. It's much bigger than that. It's this whole family's life.
I think people lost sight of the fact that there was a little girl that was murdered, and they were more intent on focusing on all of the periphery to that rather than on trying to seek justice for the little girl.
Careers have been made or altered forever.
Christ, I'm bending nails as a carpenter for a living. Right. You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, I've forfeited everything for what I thought was right, and you hit your head against the wall, and at some point, you know, you either bleed to death or quit hitting your head against the wall.
And there is a sadness that lingers in Boulder and the authorities involved. Because beyond the headlines and the media madness that was the Ramsey case, the death of a 6-year-old somehow was tragically lost.
The pageant videos are still in our mind 20 years later. That's the image that we know of this child, dressed up with adult makeup and prancing around and swinging her hips a little bit. We don't have the image of this girl, you know, going to school right here and playing in this playground with her friends and coming back with scuff marks.
But what's changed the most is the Ramsey family itself. Burke is in his late 20s, pursuing a degree in engineering. John has remarried and moved away.
A family that's under media scrutiny like they were, I don't know how they get out from under the media scrutiny. I don't think they can. You can move to a different country, and even then they'll say, well, they're hiding in Nicaragua or wherever it is. You can't get out from under it.
And the one person Boulder police were convinced was involved in JonBenet Ramsey's death succumbed to cancer in 2006.
I've been doing an informal poll during the 6 years I've written this book, and I would say 8 out of 10 of those people believe Patsy Ramsey was involved.
The one person who Boulder police believe could have solved the mystery of what happened to JonBenet went to her grave, denying any involvement in her daughter's death. And as she had done all along, Patsy Ramsey went down swinging.
Mr. Ramsey once stated that it was his intention to see that if anything came out of this case, it would be a change in the way in which the media reported certain news. And I was just wondering why, after these strong statements of principle, that you basically were willing to give a tabloid an interview.
You may be able to help solve the mystery.